impact statements. And now things are getting very real, and we're talking a lot about registration and accessing finance and getting branding, and all of the fun stuff that comes with a social enterprise as well. So we're really ramping up. We're starting strong today with a registration workshop. But welcome back, first of all. I think everyone give yourself a big round of applause for coming here on a Wednesday in mid-January. Showing up is the first thing, and you're all here. I have a not a very bad cold anymore, but it was bad, but that's why I'm so croaky. So I apologize that I'm so croaky, but don't worry, you won't be hearing much from me tonight. Just a little bit of housekeeping, as always. There's a lot of people that are going to be monitoring the chat, so please do ask questions in the chat, but stay on mute if you can throughout until there's a question or you are to bring yourself off mute. But there's a lot of people that'll be sort of monitoring the chat tonight, so we will be engaging. So if you have questions, just pop them in the Zoom chat tonight. You guys do that anyway a lot, so please just keep doing that. And if you fall off, rejoin with the same link. I know there's been some issues with the link, so I'm going to have a little look at that before our next workshop. But tonight is all about trading safely. So it's about registration, and you'll be very happy to know that you're not hearing from me tonight because you don't want to hear this very croaky voice all night. You are going to be hearing from experts in this field. Our partners and good friends from Sistren Legal Collective are here to talk to you tonight all about registration and trading safely as a social enterprise. So we have the fantastic Samara Lawrence and Kaya Advani, the co-founders of Sistren Legal Collective. Sistren Legal Collective is a community of lawyers working at the intersection of law, grassroots organizing, and movement building. They are using their knowledge of the law as a tool to support the work of leaders, activists, and change makers, and organizations like yourselves that are working in the field of social and racial justice. They have come tonight for the third time. They're with us in Ideas into Action, so we thank you very much, Samara and Kaya. But they're back again to talk all about registration for your social enterprise and what options you have. Kaya Advani is one of the co-founders of Sistren Legal Collective. She's originally from India but lives in London and is a community lawyer passionate about supporting grassroots organizations. And Samara Lawrence is the other co-founder of Sistren Legal Collective, a non-profit lawyer with a passion for supporting organizations which advocate for social and racial justice. So please, everybody, if you could join me in welcoming Kaya and Samara and saying thank you, both of you, so much. We're very excited to have two unbelievable lawyers and activists and change makers in your own right here today to talk to us about trading safely and registration. So I will hand the floor over to you, Kaya, and over to you, Samara. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that incredible introduction. I was expecting like everyone to get up and like do a round of applause or something after all of that. But thank you so much. It's like really nice to be back with turn to present this workshop again. Yeah, really looking forward to it. And we're going to be talking about lots of things which I hope will be helpful for setting up your social enterprises. Sorry, I need to get my I think Lucas has pretty much introduced us both really well. But yeah, I'm Samara. Super nice to meet all of you. I've been a lawyer for about 6 years now, working in the non-profit space. Have worked in law firms, in non-profit organizations. And more recently, we've set up Sistren Legal Collective as a way of providing legal support to community organizations and individuals who maybe perhaps previously wouldn't have been able to access lawyers through various different kind of barriers. But we're trying to make access to legal support more accessible, more democratized, and kind of sharing our knowledge where we can. So yeah, really nice to meet you, and I'll hand over to Kaya.
Hi, everyone. to be here again. As Lucas said, this is our third time back. So I am a community lawyer, as Lucas said. I've been practicing law for about 8 years now. I'm from India and worked with human rights organizations in India before I came to the UK in 2010. And I live in London now with my husband and my 2 kids. And Samara and I, as Samara was saying, just absolutely love this work, and we love being here, and we love doing the turn workshops with all of you, and really feel like we end up learning at the end of our sessions as much as so kind of helping share our knowledge. So with that in mind, we would love this to be a participatory session as much as possible, meaning please ask questions. I think the settings don't allow us to see you, so I'm not sure if I'll see you if you've raised a hand, but maybe Lucas can call out or use the chat to ask any questions as you go. You don't have to wait till the end of a section. You can just sort of keep asking, and we'll also save time at the end for questions. We'll also try and keep the session interactive, because it'll be really hard to just listen to us talk at you for the next couple of hours. So please do participate. So we'll start just with a quick Mentimeter. I think you all have used Mentimeter before, but if not, I'm going to share my screen and put the Menti up for all of you to see. Hopefully are you seeing the Mentimeter on screen? Yes,
Yeah.
okay, brilliant. So if you can start by just going to menti.com, putting in the code, or you can scan the QR code that's up on the screen with your phones to participate. Either way, I'm going to give it just a minute to allow people to start joining. And maybe once you've joined, if you just click the heart emoji or show me that you've joined, hopefully. I can't see anybody has joined as yet. Samara, Lucas, can you let me know if you're having any troubles joining? Oh, okay. A couple of people said they've joined. That's great.
He's saying waiting for a presenter.
Okay, great. Let's go on to the next slide then. So this is just to make sure the Menti is working for people. So just type hello in any language so that I know that you are here. Lovely. Few different responses coming in. So 7 or 8, 9 responses. Brilliant. 11. That's perfect. Okay, great. Thanks for the participation. 14. Let's see if we hit 15, and then I will move on. Let's stay with 14 and we'll move on. So the first question is just to introduce yourself so that we know who's in the room. We've done introductions, but it's really helpful to have a sense of who you are. We won't have time to go through all of your sort of ideas and listen to you more extensively in the way that sort of Lucas knows you, but it would just be really helpful to have a sense of who is here. So I'll wait to hit maybe 8 responses at least before moving on. And I've just put in an example of what an introduction can look like with just 3 words. So I've introduced myself as Kea, migrant, mother, lawyer. Future entrepreneur, love that. Thank you. Entrepreneur, journalist, Sudanese mother, coach. Hi, Salma, nice to meet you. Travel coach, entrepreneur. Hi, Lucas, coach, friend, uncle. I didn't know you were an uncle. Afghan scholar, active woman, Ukraine. Lovely. Really nice to sort of meet all of you and get a sense of who is here in the room. You can continue responding even if I move the slide over, but I'm just going to move to the next slide now. What are you hoping to learn in this session? If there's anything in particular that you'd like us to know, that you would really like to know about, this will help us just make sure that we're responding to your aims and objectives as part of the presentation. So I'll give it a minute before moving on, so you can add anything here. Clarity on what is the best legal structure for our project. Brilliant. That's what we're here for. So hopefully you will get that. How you can protect and get a patent for social media platform idea. We'll keep that in mind. We'll try and answer any questions about that. The type of registrations, you can choose the best one. We'll definitely cover that. Kick or charity, we'll cover that extensively. Learning about commitments after registering your business. We will cover a little bit of that, and feel free to answer any specific questions as we go. Okay. And understand the difference between a social enterprise, charity, nonprofit company. We'll definitely cover that. Feel free to keep responding, and I will look back and make sure that we're covering anything that anybody else comes up with. Registration and how to register a CIC, we'll definitely cover those. Thanks, everyone. And then finally, just a quick question to get a sense of where you are in your journey as an entrepreneur, through Turn or otherwise. So you have a few different options that you can go with. If you've already set up a company for your idea, you want to set up a company, and you know what type of company you want to set up. You want to set one up, but you don't know what company is best for your idea. You're not sure if you need a company, and you don't want to set up a company. So just give us a sense of where you are. Great. I'll wait for just a couple more responses. We have 6, 7, 8 in now. Okay, brilliant. So most people want to set up a company, but they don't know what type of company is best for their idea, or you already know what sort of company you want to set up. Since that's most of the responses, we'll make sure that we're catering the presentation to that. I think you will hopefully get what you need by the end of this session. So thank you for your responses and for giving us that. Okay, Samara, let me hand back to you in terms of slide sharing, and I'll go on to the next slide.
Great, there you go.
Brilliant, thanks. So just to give you a sense of what we will be covering through the course of this session and what the agenda looks like. We'll start the session by going through the different types of business models that your ideas could possibly fit into. Then we'll go into setting up legal company structures, and the word for that is incorporating the right structure for your business idea. We'll go through the legal structures that are available under English and Welsh law and how to choose the right structure for your work. And then we'll do a deeper dive into 2 of the common legal structures that came up as part of your responses to the mentees, so charities and community interest companies. Then we'll take a break around about 7 o'clock, so about a 10-minute break. And after that, we'll look at the detailed sort of practical steps for setting up a community interest company, because I think most of you are interested in that specific legal form. And then we'll just cover off a few comparisons between different legal forms, and also if you decide to change, especially for those of you who already have a sense of what company structure they want to set up, or if any of you have already set up a company, what changing legal forms looks like. As I said, we'll leave a space for questions at the end, but feel free to ask as we go along as well. A quick administrative point to mention is just that we will make the slides available to you after the session as well. And I think Lucas has already sent around a list of commonly used terms and definitions that we will use during the course of this presentation. So when we use terminology and jargon, if some of it feels really heavy or difficult or unfamiliar to you, feel free to use that sheet to look up definitions, but also feel free to stop us and ask us to explain anything that doesn't make sense. So by the end of the session today, we will hopefully get you to a place where you feel confident around what we mean when we talk about a legal structure for your idea, why it's important for you to get the legal structure right at the outset. What are the different types of legal structures available under English law, what structure might be suitable for your particular idea, and then actually go about setting that legal structure up. Samara, over to you.
Great, sorry. So just to start, before we jump into different legal forms, we thought it would just be helpful to really understand the different types of business models that exist. And the reason for this is that the business model really impacts the type of legal form that you would go on to choose. So broadly speaking, there are three common types of business models. And this is what we would use to describe sort of the core purpose for which an organization or a company's been set up. It really speaks to how you define yourself to the outside world, and also sort of how people would understand really what your purpose is as an organization. So here we've got three categories. We've got for-profit, not-for-profit, and social enterprise. And so I'll go through each of these business models in some detail. So the first one being the for-profit business model. Essentially, for-profit businesses are where the purpose of the organization is to make profit or money for the owners of the business. And these owners are often known as shareholders of a company. And when we say profit, what we're really talking about here is the excess money that an organization will have after it's paid all of its expenses and all of its outgoings. So every type of business, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit or a social enterprise, is going to need to generate some kind of income in order to carry out its activities, in order to pay staff, pay office space, etc. It needs money in order to survive. But the key difference with a for-profit company is that really the driving factor in the business is going to be revenue generation, not only to grow the company, but also to provide individual profit or gain or some kind of benefit to the people that own the company. So you can see the examples I've given at the bottom of the slide. So you've got organizations like Shell, Guardian, Nike, Apple, Twitter, Pizza Express. These are all organizations and companies where one of the key driving factor in their business model is to make a profit. And that's going to influence how they carry out their activities and also who their target audience is. So they're really prioritizing making as much money as possible for the business to ensure that the people that own it can take home some profit at the end of the day. And the people that own it might not necessarily be the people that are working for the company, but that can be the case. But there's usually a group of people that are known as the shareholders, and they're the ones that own the company and take home a profit at the end of the day once everyone's salaries have been paid and all the activities have been paid for. So we're not really going to focus on for-profit businesses in this workshop because you're focused on social business and non-profit businesses. But just to give you the comparison and the understanding of what a for-profit business is usually set up to do. And so then we've got not-for-profit businesses. And as the kind of name suggests, here the primary purpose is not to make a profit for the owners of the company. The purpose of a not-for-profit business is really to benefit the public or to benefit a particular community, for example. So as I mentioned, organizations that are not-for-profit are still going to need to generate income and money so that they can build their organization, so they can pay staff, so they can pay office space and rent, for example. But really, the purpose of the organization is a community one or a public one. And the activities that are being carried out are going to be activities which support a public benefit or a social benefit, for example. So these organizations are going to be focused on, for example, like creating a more equal world, supporting people who are in need. They're not going to be focused on driving profit for individual gain. In the UK, usually not-for-profit companies are known as charities, but there are other, we'll talk through other legal forms that could also be considered to be not-for-profit legal forms. And the examples I've given below are Amnesty International, which is a big UK non-for-profit organisation that focuses on human rights. We've got Active Horizons, My Grateful, Samaritans, Migrants Organised, Refugee Aid. These are all typical not-for-profit organisations that you would see. And then next up, we've got social enterprises. So a social enterprise, I would say, kind of sits in a halfway house between for-profit businesses and not-for-profit businesses. Essentially, they're a business that has primarily at its core a social or environmental benefit or purpose. So again, they are raising income and money to grow their organization, but the kind of core purpose of the business is still a community purpose. The business activities that a social enterprise are going to carry out might not necessarily be community focused in the way that a not-for-profit one. So a social enterprise might be trading, for example. So you can see in the examples below, I've given the Big Issue as an example. So they're in organizations which sells magazines in order to support people who are homeless. So the actual activity is a business activity, but the reason that they're doing the activity is to support a kind of broader community or social purpose. With social enterprises, they can make a profit in the same way that a for-profit company can, but that profit is actually limited to a certain amount. So the shareholders or the owners can only take a certain percentage of the profits, or none at all in some cases. So there is an ability to make a profit, but it's usually a capped profit. So essentially they are making money, but the real kind of purpose of the business is a social purpose and furthering some kind of social mission. And why is it important that you have a good sense of what the different business models are? Essentially, as I mentioned, it's going to impact the type of legal form that you choose. And I think it's really important that you know what the business model you want is, and then consequently can choose the right legal form for your business. And picking the right legal form is important because it can affect various different things. So I've got 4 on my slides here. So the first thing that your legal form and your business model can impact is the type of funding that you receive. So certain legal forms that we discuss, they can't receive grant funding, or they might find grant funding very difficult to get hold of. So if you're looking at grant funding as a way of raising income for your organization, you want to be very careful about the type of legal form that you pick in order to make sure that you can access grant funding. The second reason that it can impact is taxation. And so how your business is taxed. So most businesses in the UK are taxed at around 20% corporation tax. So that's quite a big chunk of money. So picking a business model that takes that into account, if you want to benefit from certain tax exemptions, is very important. So some legal forms in the UK don't pay any taxes at all. The third one is perception. So again, like, how is your business perceived by the outside world? So some legal forms are going to fit in that more non-profit category and are kind of traditionally considered to be non-profit. So for example, charities. And there are going to be some legal forms that are very easily aligned with for-profit businesses. So getting your your legal form right from the beginning is very important for how the outside world is going to perceive you and understand what your business purpose is. And then the last one is whether or not you can make a profit. So as I've mentioned, not all legal forms will allow individuals to make a profit. And as I mentioned, the profit is the kind of excess amount that the owners of the business that can take home after things like salaries have been paid and business expenses have been met. So whether or not there's ability to have this additional amount of that individuals could gain from that goes beyond salary costs and expenses is determined as well by the type of legal form that you choose.
Okay, so where I'm just going to pause for a second before we start talking about legal forms or legal structures, to make a really basic clarification on terminology and the words that we're using. And just to be really clear, when we use the words legal form, what we're referring to is the legal structure of an organization. So in English, obviously, the word form can have different meanings. So we're not talking about the kind of forms that you fill out. We're talking about the structure or personality of an organization, its mechanics, which really define how that organization works, what it can do, the rules that govern it, how it operates, etc. So when we use legal form or legal structure, that's what we mean, and that's what we're talking about through the rest of the presentation. So let's go into what really is a legal structure or a legal form. So to begin with, let's say you have an idea, you have a business idea, and let's say it is to support refugees and young people seeking asylum into employment through baked bread, the act and the skills around baking and selling bread. Just let's think about what you would need for that idea to become a reality. So you'd need the ability to employ people that you would want to engage in baking the bread. You'd need ovens to bake bread. You'd need utensils. You'd probably need some contracts to be able to buy flour for the bread. You'd need a little bit of money to get started. You insurance in case somebody breaks expensive equipment, or somebody has an allergy and there's a problem with the bread. And of course, you don't want to do this alone. The whole point of your business idea is in part to support refugees and asylum seekers through this process. And so you want people to be coming together around this idea. And so you might decide that you need to sort of formalize this idea or sort of create something out of it. And that process of moving your idea into kind of a legal house for that idea is the process of incorporation. So to incorporate organization or legal structure around that idea. So you might convert your idea into a business that has a name. The name for that is Breadwinners. And you would think about what is the kind of legal house or structure that you want for your idea. What are the rules and laws that govern what your idea can do as part of this business? And you decide to become a charitable company. And so we'll talk about charities a little bit more. So that really is the process of incorporation. This is a real example. Breadwinners is a grassroots charity that was incorporated or set up in April 2016, and its aim is to support refugees through their first steps into entrepreneurship and employment through the process of baking bread. So this is a process that Breadwinners would have gone through themselves when setting up their organization. So what actually happens when you create that legal entity or you incorporate? You create a legally recognized vehicle or a structure, which is your organization. That organization now has its own legal personality. And really what that means is that the law recognizes that business or organization as something that is separate from you as an individual. So it's created its own personality for the organization. Because the law recognizes the organization as a separate legal person, you as an individual, the person who's had the idea, are then protected against what's called personal liability. And what that really means is that you're not personally responsible for the obligations or the debts of that organization. So just as an example, if the organization, your incorporated organization, let's say takes out a loan and for some reason doesn't pay it back, you are not personally responsible for paying that loan back out of your own personal finances. So they can't, people can't go reach into your personal bank account and take the money out because the organization is a separate legal personality. The organization now has its own name, and so it can enter into contracts, leases, etc. in its own name rather than you individually entering into those agreements. And then the people responsible for the organization now have certain responsibilities as well. So certain administrative obligations like filing accounts for that organization and reporting depending on who's regulating that organization, and also paying taxes as a particular organization. So what are the sort of advantages and disadvantages of incorporating? Why would you want to do that? We've talked about the separate legal personality of an organization. So it helps separate your business idea out from yourself as an individual. In some cases, raising funds, raising money for the organization might be easier. And often banks and funders are more comfortable giving to a legal entity rather than to individuals. It often becomes easier to enter into contracts, but the flip side of that is, of course, there are administrative and governance requirements that come in as an organization. Bank accounts are usually easier to set up for an organization than for an individual. But of course, you're subject to specific legal regulations, which you need to understand as an organization. We get into some of those today. And then finally, the consequence of that limited liability that we talked about means that the directors, trustees, or the people essentially who run and own the organization aren't themselves personally liable. But on the flip side, they do have duties and responsibilities in law that they now need to fulfill as the owners or leaders of that particular organization. So the big initial question that I think entrepreneurs, all of you would need to ask yourselves is, do you actually need to incorporate, or do you need to set up that separate company? And just to clarify, incorporating isn't the first thing that you need to do. It is really important to develop your idea, to think about how you might want to fund your idea, what you want its impact to be, what role you want to play in that idea after you've kind of given birth to it. What is the role that you want to play yourself in the future development of that idea, etc. So it is important to think about those issues first and then incorporate after you've thought through those issues, just to make sure you're choosing the correct legal structure for what you actually want to do. Also think about why you want to incorporate. Is it because you want to employ people? Do you need to enter into contracts? Do you want, do you want other things that you can't get if you don't incorporate your idea? And just as a quick example, Sistren Legal Collective, we're not incorporated as a separate organization. We have a particular arrangement where we're hosted by another organization that kind of takes care of a lot of the finances, etc., for us. So we really gave ourselves time to grow and develop as an organization, and we're now 2 years later on the cusp of incorporating after having given ourselves that space to grow. So just something to keep in mind. And with that in mind, just a really quick note before we get into incorporations and organizations on sole traders. So to flag that you can often also operate as what's known as a sole trader, which is essentially a self-employed person who owns and operates their business. It means there's no legal separation between you and your business, as we talked about, because you haven't incorporated. And so you do have personal liability or responsibility for all business obligations. But as a sole trader, you can just work under your own name, or you could set up kind of a name under which you trade as a business name. And so the advantages are that it's really simple. You have total control. All of the money is yours after tax. But the disadvantages are, as a sole trader, you have personal liability or responsibility for everything your business does because there's no separation. It can often be harder to get external money or funding. And then sometimes taxes can be higher than they are for companies. Lucas, I think, has a little bit more information on sole traders if that's a route that you want to go down. And I think a couple of your alumni might have chosen that route. So he probably has better examples than us. But for the rest of the workshop, what we're going to do is focusing on, if you do want to incorporate, if that's the right choice for you, then what are your options within this context? So what we will focus on is talking about the different legal forms or the different legal structures that you can incorporate as under English law. Law in the UK is different in the different nations. So English and Welsh law comes under one umbrella, but Scottish law, for example, is a different jurisdiction. It's a different type of law. So we're talking specifically about law in England and Wales during the course of this workshop today. And what this slide essentially does is just gives you the landscape of all of the different options of legal forms or legal structures in the UK. So there are no sort of hidden options that would be super relevant. There are sort of other options that we've omitted because we're focusing on the really key ones here. And we've put them on kind of this line or a spectrum for thinking about your business model. So thinking about whether you're setting up as a for-profit business, as Samara was talking about in the beginning, you would normally go for a company limited by shares. That's the legal structure. All the way across to the other end of the spectrum, if you're operating in the world of not-for-profit legal forms or for public good legal forms, you might look at community interest companies, companies limited by guarantee, or charities. So it's that more kind of right-hand side, not-for-profit end of the spectrum that we're going to be focusing on for today's workshops. Okay, so let's go into the first set of companies, limited companies. Can go to the next slide. No, just the one before, just for a second. Sorry. Thank you. So just to clarify, limited companies, they're a really common type of legal structure, both in the UK and internationally. And what we'll do today is talk about two types of limited companies, companies limited by shares and companies limited by guarantee. So just to start out with companies limited by shares, where I'm going to talk through this because it tends to be the most familiar type of legal structure for lots of people, but it is relevant if you're a not-for-profit organization. But I'm just going to explain it for context before moving on to the not-for-profit legal forms. So I personally love books and reading. And so let's say I wanted to start as my business, I wanted to start a bookshop and earn my living by selling books. I set up a company limited by shares with myself as the owner of the bookshop. Now, in legal terms, what does it mean that I'm the owner of the bookshop? What it means is that I own all of the shares in the bookshop. Shares are the legal mechanism for the ownership in a company. So if I own all of the shares in the company, I am its sole shareholder or its only shareholder. And now, if my bookshop does really well and it sells lots of books and makes more money than it spends, it generates a profit, as we were talking about earlier. So, as the owner or the sole shareholder of the bookshop, I can pay myself part or all of those profits through a particular legal mechanism called dividends. And essentially, dividends are the payments that are made by a company to its shareholders as a share of the company's profits. So basically, this legal mechanism called shares allows shareholders to pay themselves dividends. And what that does is it allows them to benefit personally from the profit made from the business. So I'm getting a lot of profit. I'm getting a lot of money out of this business. And this legal mechanism, so shares and dividends, is the reason why a company limited by shares is usually set up as a for-profit company. Purpose of the business is to make a profit, and the shares allow me to get that profit out of the company. This is also the reason why this legal structure, so companies limited by shares, are so uncommon if you are setting up an organization whose primary purpose is for the public good or for public benefit. It's not for private benefit. And so that's why we're going to move on to talking about the legal structures that really don't provide that mechanism for a lot of personal benefit or sort of pulling profit out of the company, but are more designed for this community or public benefit structure. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a company limited by guarantee, which is the most common type of legal sort of globally or internationally that's used for public benefit or nonprofit organizations. So as before, I want to set up a bookshop, but a key reason why I want to set up this bookshop is because I'm a migrant in the UK and I want to set up a space for migrant kids for whom English is not their first language. And I want them to be able to come together, read stories, learn English, build community together. So although I want to make money and pay myself, my primary reason for setting up this bookshop is really for the good of my community. So in this case, I choose to set up a company limited by guarantee. And as you can see in the diagram for this structure, there are no shares here. So there's no legal mechanism for me to pay myself profits as the owner of this company. Just to be really clear, I can still pay myself as an employee or a staff member or a manager or a director for the organization. But normally I would pay myself like a fixed amount, like a salary, not take profits out of the company. So those are slightly different things. If my bookshop did really well and started generating a big profit and getting lots of money, I might use that money maybe to expand the work of the bookshop, to hire more staff, to get more space for our activities, and not simply to make more money for myself. So in this legal structure, rather than being called the shareholder as kind of the owner of the organization, the legal term is the member or the sole member if it's just you of the company. So just in this structure, as you can see, the mission or the purpose of the organization is really central to why I would set up this organization. So just to summarize, companies limited by guarantee, the owner is called a member, not a shareholder. You can't pay profits, but you can earn a salary. You can usually get funding for this organization. So it's much easier to access grant funding for this organization because there's no ability to kind of extract money from the organization. You have to use it for the good of the and this type of legal structure can become a charity. It's not the same thing as a charity, but it can become a charity. We are going to deep dive into charities next, but I know there's a question in the chat. What are the legal entities of for-profit with a social purpose? And we will come on to just address that a little bit later, but if you can hold on to that, let's go with charities for now.
Great. Yeah, so we're going to just do a bit of a deeper look into charities. Charities are really the most common type of not-for-profit legal entity in the UK, I'd say. It's probably the one that people are most familiar with, the terminology around charity. So we're just looking a bit more detail around what it means to set up as a charity. And we're not going to look in detail about how you set up, but just to say there are two types of legal forms that are applicable for charities in the UK. So again, we're just looking at that kind of spectrum. You can see that charities sit like right on the right hand side of what a not-for-profit entity looks like in the UK. And you can see there's two types. There's the charitable CLG, so company limited by guarantee, or the charitable incorporated organization. And these are two types of legal forms in the UK which you can choose if you want to set up as a charity. And they're just different. They are essentially the same thing. Both achieve charitable status. They're just different routes to becoming a charity. Most kind of social and smaller organizations, community organizations, they might go for the CIO route just because it's a little bit more simpler to set up as a CIO than a CLG. There's kind of just one, what we call regulator that you need to go through rather than two with the charitable company by limit, charitable CLG. So that's just to show you where they sit on the spectrum and the type of legal form that it would be. But really, I think it's important just to understand what it actually means to be a charity. I always say that not everything good is charitable under English law, and what is considered to be a charity is defined in the law and in the Charities Act. And essentially, there's two aspects to becoming a charity in the UK. So first of all, you have to be established for charitable purposes only. And I'll just talk in a minute about what exactly is a charitable purpose under English law. And the second is that you have to be for the public benefit. And what does a public benefit mean? It means that you have to be benefiting a sufficient section of the public. And also kind of obviously the work has to be beneficial. So you need to be doing more harm than good. And also importantly, that the purpose of the work is not to benefit a private individual or kind of personally benefit anyone kind of more than an incidental amount. So yeah, predominantly you need to be set up to benefit the public and then also have a charitable purpose. So what is a charitable purpose? So as I mentioned, this is set out in law. So under English law, there are essentially 13 charitable purposes that your work would have to fall under in order for the Charity Commission to give you charitable status. The language is quite fixed around what is considered to be charitable. So quite often people are community organizations, and they might be working, for example, to advance migrant rights or social justice or racial justice, for example. But as you can see on this slide, there is no such thing as a charitable purpose, which is migrant rights, advancing or migrant rights, for example, or racial justice. So instead, what you have to do is look at these charitable purposes and say, does my work fit into one of these categories? And therefore, it takes a bit of work to kind of translate what community organizations are doing into what the law kind of identifies as being charitable. But there's some of these which might feel a bit more familiar. So, for example, the prevention or relief of poverty is a very common charitable purpose, especially for humanitarian organizations. So, Save the Children, for example, will be set up to relieve poverty. You've got the advancement of education, again, another quite common charitable purpose. So educational establishments or anyone that wants to advance education in various different forms. So it could be like nurseries or schools or bookshops, for example, libraries, they all fall under the advancement of education. You've got the advancement of religion. Lots of religious institutions are also charities. And you've got like the advancement of health or saving lives, which again, another common charitable purpose. So for example, the Red Cross would be fall under that bracket. And then you've got things like advancement of arts and culture, heritage or science. So lots of museums and art galleries that are also charities would fall under that charitable purpose. And then you've got things like sports, so sports clubs, advancement of animal welfare. That's how you get like the RSPCA and other kind of typical animal charities in the UK. So that just gives you a sense of the buckets you need to fit under in order to be classified as a charity. So assuming that you fall under one of those buckets and you can register a charity, there's a few important, I guess, aspects of being a charity that you should take into account, and certain kind of things that you are kind of obligated to do in order to become a charity. And the first one of those is that you need to have 3 trustees in order to be registered as a charity. And the trustees of a charity, these are individuals who are responsible for the overall stewarding and direction of the organization. So they are the equivalent of directors in companies. The kind of unique aspect about a trustee is that in a charity is that they usually cannot be paid for their role. So it's inherently a voluntary sector. And so the idea is that trustees volunteer their time to help run and manage charities. And as you can imagine, lots of organizations find it challenging to find individuals who are able to provide their time for free. So one of the things we always say is that if you're thinking about being a charity, is like, do you have 3 people in your network essentially that you could call on to be voluntary trustees for the organization? You can get potentially one trustee to be paid, but it's very difficult, impossible even to have all of the trustees be paid. And so that's just something to think about when becoming a charity. The main reason why people become a charity essentially is to benefit from tax breaks. So charities don't pay any tax in the UK, so they are kind of exempt from paying that 20% corporation tax, which other organizations will pay on their profits or their surplus income at the end of the year. So it's a very big benefit of being a charity. But the flip side of having the tax breaks is that it's quite a highly regulated legal structure to adopt. The Charity Commission is the regulator for charities in the UK, and they're quite a hands-on regulator. So they really do a lot of scrutiny around checking whether or not organizations are actually charities, that they're doing what they say they're going to be doing, that there aren't kind of individuals in the organization that are personally benefiting from charity. So that's why you might see some of those scandals in the newspaper around people that have set up charities, and you see like the son or the daughter has built like a swimming pool or something with charity money. That's essentially what the Charity Commission is trying to stop from happening, because the public will often donate to charities. Again, the fact that there are tax breaks and the fact that they're regulated means the general public is quite inclined to give their own money to charities. So it can help with fundraising to have charitable status, but it kind of comes with some downsides around additional scrutiny and regulation. The other thing to be aware of is that charities can't be political in their purpose. So you can't have a charity which is also a political party, for example, or set up to kind of advance a sole political purpose, for example. So some organizations, especially where the topic is inherently political, for example, migrant rights can be quite a political topic in the UK. Sometimes they can struggle with charitable status because of the nature of the causes that they stand for. So that's just something to be aware of. And yeah, no profits can be taken out of the organization. So all the money that the charity has to be used for the purpose for which it was set up. So that charitable purpose. And it's very difficult to undo charity status once you've got it. So another thing just to be aware of. So I wanted just to take a moment just to do a short case study just to get you thinking about being a charity or another type of legal form. So this is just, and there's a couple questions in the next slide just for you to have a think about and to answer. But the case studies, just thinking about another individual has got an idea. They're really passionate about transforming the transformative power that education and access opportunities have on young people's lives. They want to create an organization that has a platform for young people in the neighborhood to help them develop new skills and nurture their independence and creativity. And the way they plan on doing this is by running a youth leadership program, a mentoring program, and having classes for essential skills like sewing, baking, and hair braiding. This person, they want to be paid, but they also know 2 people in their network who are happy to support the idea on a voluntary basis. And one of those mentors also thinks that they can help get some programs funded through grants from charitable foundations. So I just wanted to take a minute for people to have a think about these 3 questions. So could you set yourself up as a charity if you were this person? And what would make setting up as a charity a good option for them? And also, could they pay themselves as the CEO of the charity? I think, Kaya, do you have a mentee for this, or is it just easy for people to put in the chat?
It's just a discussion in the round. It's
Okay,
not
fine. Yeah, so just any thoughts people want to come off mute, or if they want to put anything in the chat just to have a think about those 3 questions.
So Mara, do you want to go back to the case study as the slide so people still have that up? And I can put this 3 questions in the chat. Does anybody want to give it a shot? There aren't really wrong answers. It's just a discussion that we'll go through.
Okay, got one answer the chat. I'm happy just to talk through it. So yeah, you could be a company limited by guarantee. That would be a good option as well for this organization, they're essentially a not-for-profit organization. So of the ones we've been through, a CLG would work, but also charity would work in this case as well. What would make it a good option for setting up as a charity? So one of the things we'd said in the case study was that the individual had 2 mentors that were willing to be volunteers. And I think that kind of goes to the point I mentioned about the trustees being unpaid. So essentially you need people in your network who are able to volunteer their time. And if you have that might be a reason why you think, actually, I could set up as a charity because I have some people that are willing to be a trustee. So I just saw Lucas said how many trustees. So 3 trustees is the minimum number. There's no maximum number of trustees. I would say that you don't want to have too many because it's a lot of people that need to take decisions and that you need to bring together. So people have like between 3 and 8. If you're a much bigger charity, you might have 12, but around 3 is usually is acceptable. And then the question, could you pay yourself as the CEO? So yes, you can pay yourself as a staff member. So the CEO would be considered to be a staff member. So if you were setting up the organization yourself, you would think about whether or not you'd want to be on the board or whether you would want to be the CEO. And so in this case, if you want to be paid, it's going to make more sense if you're the CEO of the charity, probably rather than you're on the board as a trustee. But the issue that organizations, individuals find is that they're then kind of giving up control of their organization to this voluntary board of trustees who essentially run and control the organization. So it's a little bit of thinking around what is best for you as an individual and your organization and deciding whether or not that's what you want to do. So this was an example. I think these are a Turn alumni, Active Horizons. So they went down the charity route. And yeah, they had a board of trustees who were responsible for the strategic oversight and legal responsibilities of the organization. The staff could be paid. They couldn't take any profits out of the company as like the trustee board. They were able to benefit from the tax exemption, so they didn't pay the corporation tax. And it was quite easy for them to get grants as well because they're a charity, and funders are usually charities themselves. And so they're very willing to give to other charities if they kind of fit within their remit of the kind of work they're trying to support. So charities are probably the easiest of the legal forms to get funding for, but you can definitely get funding for other forms as well. And so we'll move on to community interest companies.
Okay, so I think there's a question in the chat that I haven't got to yet, so I'll leave that to you, if that's okay, and continue on with community interest companies, and then we'll take a break after that, because I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. So we're going to talk in more detail about community interest companies. I'm going to refer to them as KICs for short, CICs or KICs. So you know I'm not kicking anybody, it's just the acronym. And so we'll talk about what they are, their uses, restrictions, and really how to set one up. KICs are relatively new in the UK legal landscape, and they are their own, by relatively new, I mean maybe about 15 years old. They are their own type of legal entity, and they are created specifically with social entrepreneurs in mind. KICs can be set up in two different ways. So as you can see on the screen there, they can be set up as a KIC limited by shares or a KIC limited by guarantee. So just like limited companies, KICs limited by shares have shares. And so they allow for their owners to make a profit, but the amount of profits that can be made are limited by law because there's this overriding community interest purpose that overrides the ability to make a profit. So just in answer to the earlier question in the chat, somebody had asked, what are the legal entities that are for profit with a social purpose? I think a KIC limited by shares is probably closest in terms of answer to that question. But today we're going to focus actually on KICs limited by guarantee, because as we talked about earlier, the limited by guarantee model is much more common for organizations that are set up primarily for public good or community benefit, and they find it much easier to attract grant funding or philanthropic funding. So that's the model that we're going to focus on today. So as we just discussed, KICs can be limited by shares or guarantee. And then, as their name suggests, the primary purpose of a community interest company is to provide benefits to the community rather than to the owners or the people who work within the organization. And to meet this overriding community interest principle, a KIC needs to pass a community interest test. And that test is, would a reasonable person consider that the activities of the organization are carried out for the benefit of the community? So would a reasonable person consider that the activities of a KIC are for the benefit of the community? So as you can probably tell, this is not a particularly difficult test. It means it's a relatively low threshold for being able to register as a KIC. And what you would need to ask yourself is, would somebody looking at the activities of my organization sort of think and understand that its activities are carried out primarily for the benefit of the community? And when I say community, this could include a section of a community. So, for example, you could say my community is refugees in England. Or you could have a section of a community and say, I'm going to focus on, let's say, the refugee community in Haringey in London. So it can be a section of a community. A key advantage of community interest companies is that they can just be set up with one director. So unlike charities that we just talked about that need 3 directors or trustees in place, community interest companies just need one to start up. And then a really key feature of a community interest company is the fact that they have what is called an asset lock. So I'll explain this a little bit. An asset lock is basically a legal rule that restricts or locks the assets of an organization. And by the assets, I mean the money, property, equipment, anything that the organization owns. All of that is locked for its community purpose. So as an example, if you have a building which is providing, let's say, childcare in your community, and the building is an asset of your KIC, then use that building for a completely different purpose. So, for example, to be a gym. This asset lock also means that you can't sell the assets of your organization at a discount. So if you do sell them, you need to sell the assets at sort of the full market value, so that their value is sort of retained within the KIC for its community purpose. So that explains an asset lock. Essentially, the assets of a KIC need to be used for its community purpose. For this reason, a KIC is also a bit more likely to be able to access grant funding because it has this asset lock, and funders know that all of the money as part of the assets of the organization can only be used for that community purpose. It can't be used to make a profit just for an individual person. Directors in a KIC can be paid a salary. So this is again in contrast to the trustees in a charity that we were just talking about, who can't be paid. Generally, they can't be paid as trustees or paid a salary, but directors in a KIC usually can. Legally, there's no problem with that. And KICs are simpler and quicker to set up. So charities can often take many, many months to set up because they have to go through this more complicated registration process with the Charity Commission, whereas a KIC is much simpler to set up, and you can usually set it up, once you have your paperwork in order within a week or less. And that's also one of the key reasons why entrepreneurs often choose to set up as a KIC. So what is it that you can't do as a KIC? What are the restrictions? You don't get the tax exemptions that you do as a charity. So if you earn lots as through the course of your business, or if you attract lots of grant funding, as a KIC, you will pay corporation tax on any surpluses at the end of your year. So any money that you haven't used, and this includes funding. So if you received a grant and you had some of that grant money left over at the end of your financial year, there is a corporation tax charge on that funding. You can't carry out political purposes. So this means you can't generally support, obviously political parties or candidates or causes. You often can't, let's say, campaign to change legislation in a political way. So there are restrictions on political activity for KICs. And obviously a KIC isn't a charity. As I said, it's its own distinct legal form. But some types of KICs can convert to a charity. It becomes a bit more complicated, but the basic point is it's not the same as a charity. It's a different legal structure. So we'll just end this section with another little case study. So let's say your idea is to start a community cafe where low-income refugee and single parents can come together while they're working or studying. The cafe provides free childcare, And in the longer term, you want the cafe to be staffed by the community of parents who will provide and you'll provide training and employment for them. You do want to be paid a salary, and you want to be able to employ others to help you run the cafe. You don't expect to have lots of profits or make tons of money, and you expect you'll probably spend most of what you're earning on the costs of running the cafe. And then in terms of funding, you plan to launch a crowdfunding campaign at some point to help you with the costs. And I think the last bit is getting cut off, maybe just in my screen, but you also plan to earn income through selling the coffee itself, and maybe from charging monthly membership fees for people. So that's your business idea. So the questions we have around that for you to consider is, what in this structure would make setting up a CIC a good idea? So why might you want to set up as a kick? And then could you use the coffee machines that you have for something else? So I'll just drop the questions in the chat. Samara, could you change the slide for the questions? So those are the questions. They're in the chat as well. And maybe if you wouldn't mind going back again, just so the case study is up for people to consider. Okay. Any responses in the chat, or feel free to unmute? Sorry, the case study has disappeared, Samara.
I don't see any political purposes here, so I think this might make the company a good fit for this type of registration. The other thing is that the purpose here is to benefit the community. Most of the money that's coming in is to sustain this cafe and just provide more services, and doesn't say much about extra profit for the founder.
Yeah. Absolutely. Completely bang on. Thank you for that. So, yeah, clearly no political purposes, nothing that would really prevent you from registering as a community interest company in that sense. There is also this really clear community purpose. So I think if a reasonable person looked at this organization, you'd say, yeah, it's set up for a community purpose. It's not, just for the owners to make money, or that, the primary purpose is a community purpose. There is, as a community interest company, you can pay yourself. So if you're the person sort of starting this out and setting this up, and you want to make sure you're paying yourself, you probably don't want to go down the charity route unless you know that you have 3 other people who can act as trustees or directors for the organization. So that's another good reason to set up a CIC. And then clearly there's this element of sort of trading, business trading. So you're selling coffee, you might be selling memberships, you're providing a service as well. And so that sort of structure is often good as social entrepreneurs for this kind of social enterprise structure. So a community interest company. So thanks for the chat response. So you think you can use the coffee machines for other purposes as long as it increases revenues for the CIC, or it does community benefit? Yes, that's right. So if you're using it in a way that is contributing to the assets of the organization, increasing its money, providing a community benefit, yes, you can. If you, as in the previous example, decided to also provide the space as, let's say, a gym space for people to work out in the evening, and then provide them with coffee, that would be more problematic as a use of the coffee machines, because it's not furthering your community purpose. But yes, selling coffee at community events, that is aligned with the purposes of your organization, that would probably be an acceptable use of your assets. And so, as before, this was an example from a Turn alumni. So just on the next slide, we have the example of Coffee with Kids, which was set up through the Ideas for Action cohort, I believe. And it was set up as a sole director. It obviously used its assets for community purpose. So provision of coffee as part of this childcare setup. And it did have access to grant funding. but it didn't get any tax exemptions, obviously, because it's a community interest company and not a charity. So really the question, I think, for you, when you are weighing up your options in terms of how do you want to set up, which one should you go for? Is it a charity? How do you decide? So we've set out a few key considerations around this. So timing is a really big one, because kicks are much faster to set up, as I said. Application process is much less complicated. Charities take much longer time to set up. So that the comparison is, let's say, 3 weeks for a kick versus maybe 4 months at the earliest for a charity. Tax benefits. So only charities benefit from tax breaks. So if you think you're going to have lots of funding coming in, lots of money coming in, then it becomes more of a hassle to manage that in a way that that you don't get taxed very heavily on that. Obviously, you don't have to think about that if you're a charity. Regulations, charities are much more highly regulated by the Charity Commission. Your activities are looked at a lot more than if you're a community interest company. Key question around raising funds. How are you planning to get money into this organization? If you want grants, and that is the key sort of go-to for how you want to raise money, it is easier still to raise money as a charity, but it is possible as a community interest company. Then thinking about what is your purpose. So going back to the idea that Samara was talking about, that you need to fall within these 13 charitable purposes if you're a charity. Not everything that, everything good isn't charitable. So you'd need to think quite carefully about how your purposes fit charity law. And then thinking about profits, and whether you need to make some profit from the organization. And then finally, trustees and directors. So do you want 3 sort of volunteer people to be involved in the governance and running of your organization? If so, a charity might be a good fit for you. If not, then you might be thinking more about a community interest company. Okay, that was a lot of talking. We're going to break there.
Don't worry. Okay, great.
Do you prefer me to stop share?
No, that's fine. It's fine. If you just make it a bit bigger, that's all right.
Yep.
Okay, so the first, we're going to just use the same example that was in the workshop now around setting up a community interest company. So usually what we say, the first step in setting up, people often have a name in mind for their organization, and people can often get very disappointed when they kind of go through the whole process and they realize that the name that they've chosen, someone else has already taken that name and it's not available. So we usually recommend the first step is to check whether the name that you want to use for your community interest company or your business is actually available. And the way that you can check whether your name is available is by using what's called the name availability checker, which is on Companies House. And so that is in the first link there. I'm happy to, I don't know if you open yours, it will show on your screen. Great, yeah. So you've got the company name availability checker though. So what you can do is you can put in your proposed company name into that search function and see if it's available. So Kay, I don't know if you want to I just put in Liberation or something as a company name. So say you wanted to call yourself Liberation CIC, you would see here that Liberation CIC is the same as an existing company already. And so you wouldn't be able to use Liberation CIC as your company name because somebody else has already chosen it and incorporated their company with the same name. So you would have to pick a different name for your company. And what you can do at this point is just play around a little bit with different variations of the company name. So Ikea typed in Liberation Movements here, CIC. you can see here that there's no exact name matches found for liberation movement. So that's good news. So that means it's very likely that you'll be able to use that name as your company name and register with a company. So you can see the link below, which says register a company name. So that's the first step. When I finish going through this, I'll talk a little bit more about names. The second aspect of the names is whether or not it contains a sensitive word or not. And so again, there are certain words that people want to use which are considered sensitive and are therefore kind of regulated by various different bodies. So you can see here, you click on the list of sensitive names and there are various different words that are considered to be sensitive. So for example, the word bank, or the word association, or British, or if you were to use the royal family, and you can see charitable, etc. These are all sensitive words, and there are specific criteria you need to meet in order to use those words. And that's basically to protect these words, so people don't call themselves a bank when they're not a bank, for example, and it's to protect consumers essentially, so that consumers are not misled as to the type of kind of service they're purchasing or goods they're purchasing, for example. So you can see you can't use NHS in your name if you're not an NHS provider, for example. So just to be aware of those two aspects of names when you are thinking about what to call your organization. So that's step one. Step two would be preparing your articles of association. So the articles of association are also known as the constitution or the governing document, and you have to have articles of association when you're setting up a CIC. Luckily, the CIC regulator has a whole set of model articles which are already pre-prepared that you can use. And I know Lucas and Tern also have their own model articles that you can ask for. So you don't have to create anything from scratch, which is great. So I definitely recommend you ask Lucas for the articles when you're ready to incorporate. So here you can see there are actually lots of different options for selecting your model articles. I would say most of these are relevant for you, but it's very difficult to know which one is the right one. But in the case of you're first of all looking for the words company limited by guarantee, if that's the option that you want to go for. So you remember there was company limited by guarantee or company limited by shares for the CIC. So most people will be going for the company limited by guarantee model articles. There's also two types. So there's small membership and there's large membership articles. The most common for kind of small organizations, community organizations, is the small membership articles. And I would say that's the ones that you should be going for. If you're thinking that that doesn't work, you can get advice. So you can ask us, or you can ask Lucas if you think maybe the large membership, but I can kind of 95% of people will go for the small membership articles. So those are the ones to pick. So you could open those articles and see what the model articles look like. So you'll get a downloadable version. And they will open up, and you can see here that they're pretty much already pre-prepared for you. And there's some places in square brackets that will require you to make changes in the document, but there's not too many places. So here, for example, you can see in 3.5 that what the articles are asking you to do is to choose another organization, either a charity or another CIC, that if you were to close your community interest company and you had some assets left over, you had some money, you had some equipment, where that equipment would go to, or where those assets would go to if you were going to close down your CIC. So you can choose an organization from the outset. You can put their details here, and then all of the assets when you close that you have left over would go to that organization. It's not a requirement. You don't have to complete this. You can if or when you close, you can speak to the regulator for community interest companies to decide where the assets will go. So it's an option to put it in now, but you don't have to put it in at the kind of outset if it's not needed. You can also see that there's some parts in red in the document. Basically anything that's in red in the model articles cannot be changed. So that is, for example, there you can see the asset lock. That's the legal wording that creates the asset lock for a community interest company. You cannot change that wording when you go to incorporate, otherwise your application would be rejected. But the other parts of the governing document, the Articles of Association in black, you can change and you can make changes to. So here, for example, in 5, this is the objects of the CIC. So the objects are, what is the purpose of the community interest company? So what are you set out to do? How are you going to benefit your community? So you would have to prepare that yourself. And that's usually the trickier bit, is actually formulating the words to describe what your organization does and what activities and who it's going to benefit. Quite often people can be a bit long-winded about it, but it's better to kind of keep it concise. And Kay and I have lots of experience of helping people to formulate their objects or their purpose in a way that kind of makes sense for this these Articles of Association. And I saw Lucas has got a lot of experience as well of helping people to make that kind of concise statement. So that's probably the key places where you need to make changes. There's lots of footnotes to help guide you, and kind of explanatory notes as well in the articles, so you understand what each of these provisions mean. So you can see there were Kaya's link to the notes, and this basically just helps explain what each of those provisions means. The Articles of Association, they are legal documents, so they can be quite difficult to work through. They're quite long and there's lots of legal language. So kind of what we try and do is just help people understand what it is that they are signing themselves up for. But essentially the articles are just there to help you understand what your organization's purpose is and how you run your organization, what happens when you close your organization, whether or not there are restrictions on payment. So, for example, if you were setting up the community interest company limited by shares, you would see that there was the ability to make payments through dividends in the articles, and that there is a restriction on how much you can be paid through those dividends. So these basically set out the parameters of how the organization runs. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight of what that document looks like. The second document is that you have to complete in order to set up a KIC is the KIC 36 form. So the KIC 36 form is essentially the application form that you are making to the regulator, so the entity that decides whether or not you meet the criteria for becoming a CIC. So you would, again, download the version of the application form. We'd always say to go back to the version on the website that we've linked to, because they make changes to these documents every so often. And so you don't want to be in a situation where you've got an old version and then you try and submit it and they reject your application. So this form here essentially, again, is for you to set out like what your company name is. And you'll see that where it says company name, it says community interest company on the end. So every community interest company will always end either in CIC or in community interest company. That differs to limited companies. So the limited by guarantee, the limited by shares, they would always end in LTD or limited. But community interest companies end in CIC or community interest company. And then the first question in the application form is for you to state who is the just wait for it to come back.
Sorry, the Word
Right.
has gone into a weird format. Just give me a sec. I will just reopen it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Great. So sorry, to section A, if that's all right. So section A, so the first question you have to answer in this box is who you are benefiting. So it says, give a short description of the community or the section of the community which it is intended that the company will benefit. And I think you'll remember from Kaya's presentation that you need to be benefiting the community in order to be registered as a community interest company. So you need to say who you're providing a benefit to. So for example, if you were wanted to benefit people who are resident in East London, I think that was the example that Lucas gave in the chat earlier, you would have to say that the company's activities will provide benefit to residents in East London, for example. Or you might not want to be so specific about the kind of geographical remit, but you might want to say who the benefit is to. So it might be, the company's going to provide a benefit to young people who are kind of working, like not needing to know about education or something. So it might be that you're working with young people, it might be that you're benefiting refugees or migrants, or it might be that you're benefiting disabled people, for example. So who is it that you are doing this work for, and who is part of the community? So that's who you would state in this box. The second part of the question, so section B, is the community interest statement. So these are your activities and the related benefits. So what you need to put in this box essentially is what are the activities that you're going to be carrying out, and then how do those activities benefit the community? And they want you to kind of give as much detail as you can. You might not know exactly every activity that you're going to be carrying out. So in the example we gave earlier, which was the one with the cafe, for example, so it might be that you're setting up a cafe, you might be selling coffee and cakes, for example, and you're also going to be having a space for people to learn and have education. So there might be reading materials, for example, that are being provided, or there might be lessons or classes. So you might be saying, I'm carrying out workshops, or I'm carrying out classes for children. So what is the activity that the organization is carrying out? And then you have to say how the community that you are setting up for is going to benefit from the activity. So it can be a bit challenging to kind of describe that and to really articulate how is the activity that you're carrying out going to benefit your community. But that's essentially what they're looking for in deciding whether or not that you meet the definition or meet the criteria for being a community interest company. So again, like have a go if you're finding it a bit challenging, or you're not too sure if you've kind of articulated it in a way that the regulator will understand, then like feel free to just ask and get input into the application form. We're happy to look at it. So we just go, it's just going to go down to the bottom, sorry, Kaya, of the application form. This question here, where it says, if the company makes any surplus, it will be used for, you can say it'll be reinvested back into the company, into the CIC, and to kind of grow the organization. So there's quite an easy statement that you can add there. And then if you go down a bit, this is just here, then you have to sign the document. And so anyone who's going to be a director of the CIC has to sign the document. So you can set up a CIC with one director, but you might want to consider having additional people that are on board to help support you with driving forward the organization. Sometimes funders, if you're looking for grant funding, they will want to see that there's at least 2 directors, for example, on the board of the CIC. But to set up with, you just need one. But quite often you might find that over time that you feel like you might want to or need to add in additional directors. But yeah, they can sign the form, and they need to sign the form in order to be named as directors at the outset. I think that is all the things that are on the form. So yeah, it's relatively short. Compared to a charity, this is a very, very short form. The charity application is about 80 pages long and has multiple questions and things that you need to submit. So I think someone asked in the chat, how long does it take? So once you've completed the form, you can submit that application on Companies House. So you can do it online, or you could submit it by post. I think it's slightly cheaper to submit it online. So you pay £65. That's actually gone up quite a bit in the last year or so. So which it's still quite expensive to submit for the CIC, but cheaper to do it online. And then, it takes not very long to, if they are happy with your CIC application, it takes about a week for them to process and to send you back your certificate of incorporation, and you'll see your details appear on Companies House for the registration. So very quick compared to a charity, which can take like minimum 3 months. So most people go for the CIC just for kind of ease and speed. So in the worksheet, we've just given quite a few resources as well. So the example copy with kids, their registration information is in the link there as well. So you can see how they described who their beneficiaries were and also the activities that they were carrying out. So if you go here to the incorporation details, you can view their application form. And this is also something to bear in mind, that when you submit your application will also be visible on Companies House. So you have to be mindful of what you put in the application. So your article, you can see here, these are their articles of association that they prepared. You can kind of have a look at this as an example one to see what they changed, and then you can see the KIC 36 form as well is uploaded, and you can see their activities that providing free childcare and the kind of how those activities were benefiting the community. So yeah, that helps with just a description. Oh yeah, and then you can see, yeah, who their beneficiaries are. Great. And then in this resources, we've also linked to we created a legal toolkit, a community legal toolkit, which we'll link to at the end of the presentation, just to help you, which was basically just us setting out the different legal forms that there are in the UK, and with lots of reflections from people from the community about how they found setting up, some of the challenges in these different legal forms. So, and there's also the process for how to set up a CIC in the legal toolkit, and also comparison tables with the other legal forms as well. So you can, again, help this kind of inform your decision making. And then there's other resources there on setting up social enterprises, the step-by-step guidance. So yeah, lots of information. Someone also asked about converting to a CIC. So you might have a company, for example, that you want to convert to a CIC, so a CLG or a CLS, and there's slightly different forms that you would use if you need to convert a company to a CIC. So we've linked those, and also the special resolutions that you need. But yeah, if that is a slightly more complicated process, if you need to change a company to a CIC, but we're happy to help with that as well. So yeah, I think that is everything on that worksheet as well. There's also the process for setting up a charity a bit further down as well. But yeah, I'll just pause there on that one. Thank you, Kaya, for sharing screen. I will go back to mine. Great. Okay. Jay, just wanted to go back to kind of naming your business. So as I mentioned, we talked through how you can check whether your name is available using that Companies House checker, trying the different variations of the name if you can't get exactly the name that you want from the get-go. The other step also, just to add into this, is also to check if your name has been trademarked. And so trademarking is like a legal protection that lots of organizations use to stop other organizations from essentially imitating them. And so if you wanted to call your organization, for example, like Four Seasons, you would probably find that there's a trademark already for Four Seasons, because I think there's like hotels, etc., that are called that. So you also want to check on the trademarks register as well to see if the name has been trademarked, because if you pick a name that has been trademarked, it's quite likely that if they realize, they might send you a letter to say stop using the trademark. And it might be that it's not necessarily that their company is called that, but they might have trademarked a word or a name outside of it being their company name, which might mean that it wouldn't necessarily come up on the Companies House search, but it might come up in other formats. So definitely check that as well. If you're finding that you can't find a kind of a name that hasn't been taken already, you might want to register with a different name and then use a trading name. So you could register, for example, as Liberation Movement as your company name, but then you could trade under the name Liberation, and that is usually fine as well. So it just gives you another alternative. It means that, like, if you use a trading name, your business name is not the same as your trading name. So just to be aware, but it can be how you describe yourself, like on your website, etc., as long as you're kind of making it clear that what your actual company registered name is. Okay, so just kind of coming to a close now. So we've just got a table here, which is a comparison of the common nonprofit forms. In the toolkit that we've produced, there's a much bigger comparison table, but this just gives you an overview of companies limited by guarantee, the CIC, and the charity around what it costs to register, and some of the kind of ongoing costs and filing fees, which kind of regulator they are subject to. So you can see that companies limited by guarantee are regulated by Companies House, CICs are regulated by Companies House and the CIC regulator, and then you have charities which are regulated by the Charity Commission, and in some cases the Companies House and the Charity Commission. And you can see that grant funding is very accessible to charities. Most funders will fund a community interest company, but you might find that some funders won't. They might only fund a charity. And again, company limited by guarantee, lots of funders will fund CLGs, but some of them, because CLGs don't have the asset lock in them, they might not fund a CLG. So again, that going back to that previous slide we had on this kind of scale of fundability. And then tax breaks, lots of you have asked about tax breaks. So yeah, companies limited by guarantee, CICs, they do not have any tax breaks, but a CIO and a charitable status does. So they're the only one. Sorry, that should actually say yes to charitable CIG having tax breaks, not none in the third column. So yeah, they do have tax breaks. I think one thing that I would say is that some people, you only pay tax on your kind of surplus profits at the end of the year. So obviously, if you have income and you spend it all on expenditure, there will be no kind of surplus at the end of the year for you to be taxed on. But it can be quite difficult to manage that, and I would really recommend getting advice from an accountant to help you with managing your income and your expenses and your tax liability at the end of the year, because it can be quite difficult to ensure you kind of spent down on everything to ensure that you're not going to be taxed a lot at the end of the tax year. And it's quite hard for people to have no tax liability at all. But definitely possible if you kind of manage your accounting in the right way. So yeah, that's a quick comparison on the different legal forms. And then just to finish off, so a couple of people had also asked about changing legal forms and whether it's possible to go from one legal form to another. Here it's just a summary of when you can change and when you can't. But as a basic principle, if you are a company limited by shares, and that includes a KIC limited by shares, you cannot change to a company limited by guarantee or a KIC limited by guarantee. And that's because the company limited by shares and the company limited by guarantee, they're completely different legal forms. So having shares or not having shares means that you can't move between those two legal forms. So if you pick CLS, you cannot then move to CLG or vice versa. And if you've picked a KIC CLG, you can't move to a KIC CLS and vice versa. So we have to rule that one out. What you can do is move from a company limited by guarantee to a KIC company limited by guarantee. So if you've got a limited company, CLG or CLS, you can move into the KIC equivalent of those. And so that was in the steps plan. I was saying there were slightly different forms if you are doing that conversion from a company to a CIC. So you can do that. And then the last one is that you can go from a CIC to a CIO, so a charity. So there's a tick by that CIC to charity status. So that works. You can't go from a charity to a CIC. There should be a cross by that one. And you can go from a CLG to a charity. So if you start off with a CLG, you could then get charitable status on top of that as well. So yeah, that is changing legal forms. And if anyone has any questions, I'm sure the chat is happening. But yeah, I think we've pretty much come to the end of our presentation. So I'll just pause and see if anyone wants to ask any questions that are not being answered in the chat box. $39 new messages, wow. Okay, so it sounds like no more questions to ask at the moment. Oh,
I have
sorry.
some questions.
Oh, sorry, yeah, go for it.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is a lot.
Yeah.
Trying to digest it and to get familiar with it. I had two questions. For the CIC, can some of the directors be based out of UK? Like if one director is in UK, can the remaining two directors be out of UK?
Yeah, that's possible. You can have directors outside of the UK. I think it's usually you definitely need at least one that's in the UK, but others can be outside the UK.
Okay. And my second question also, when you talk about assets, what about like intellectual property, training course material, mobile application? Would that also be considered as asset?
Yeah, so intellectual property is a form of asset. So it's kind of, I think if you think about intellectual property, it's something that benefits the organization. So yeah, that is definitely an asset. And so those, if you're thinking about the asset lock and how that applies, you can't, if you're a CIC, you can't just give away your intellectual property for free because it's an asset of the organization. Mobile things like mobile applications, I wouldn't really say they're assets. It's like I guess like a functionality of the service. And if you are paying for a mobile application, for example, and therefore your organization is benefiting from that, I don't think that I would say is still is an asset of the organization. So I don't think you could say you were benefiting from Microsoft Office. And you're paying for that application on your phone, I don't think you could just then share your Microsoft Office application with any company to use as well. It would have to be for the benefit of the community, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was more like referring like to a mobile. If we develop a mobile application.
Oh, I
for
see. I see.
community that
Yes.
is benefiting the community.
Oh,
and that
yeah,
has
that's
support
definitely
with
your asset.
information
Yeah.
of members. Yes.
Yeah. Like a mobile app would be intellectual property,
Okay.
which is an asset of the business. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Oksana?
Oh, hi. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just a bit confused with you said the first 3 points, it was for profit, non-profit, and social enterprise.
Yeah.
So this community, for example, CIC, does it go under it or is it separate to them?
Yeah, it kind of fits under it. So it's a good question. And like often people are confused by oh, something happening to my screen.
Sorry, I just thought we could all then see each other who's asking.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That was me.
The community interest company is the legal form. And I would say that community interest companies would fit either under social enterprise as a bucket of business model or under non-profit, sort of depending on what the community interest company is doing. So business model was like non-profit, for-profit are like a descriptor of the purpose of the organization or what it's doing. And then CIC is the legal form that you might associate with that type of business model, if that makes sense.
So where does CIC goes? To social enterprise or non-profit?
I would say I can't say categorically, but I would say lots of CICs are social enterprises because they're carrying out some kind of trading, they're kind of acting like a business. And some CICs will make a small amount of profit as well. So you would say they're a social enterprise, but lots of CICs are completely not for profit and they kind of operate lots like charities as well. So you could put them under the not-for-profit bucket. But it can't, again, it's whether you call yourself a social enterprise or a non-profit is a lot about how you personally want to identify as an organization and like the messaging you put out into the world. So I wouldn't get too worried about whether or not you're a social enterprise or a non-profit organization, like whatever feels right for you and the language that you want to use to describe yourself.
Well, I thought it's important if you want to write a grant application.
Yeah, it's true. It is important. But I think if you feel more comfortable calling yourself a social enterprise, and maybe Lucas can guide a bit on like what is the right kind of categorization depending on the work that you're doing with your organization.
And the other question is, a quick one. You said about paying yourself a salary if you start CIC. Can the salary be changed, or you have to set up this certain amount in the beginning and write it down in a grant application, and then it can't be changed?
Salaries can definitely be changed. I would be surprised if it didn't ever change, given that everything goes up in price every single year. So, yeah, there's no reason why it has to be fixed. I think it might be a bit challenging if it was to jump up like massively, like the next year. But yeah, you would definitely expect, and there wouldn't be any issue with increasing your salary each year, you know, especially in line with inflation.
Thank you.
That's okay, thank you. Is it Ruqayya?
Ruqayya.
Ruqayya.
Yes, I have a question. So most of the examples that were mentioned earlier about you know, like organizations set within the UK. So for us, our beneficiaries, you know, some of them could be in the UK, but some of them could be in other parts of the world. So I'm wondering if that impacts the legal structure that we are choosing. And the other thing is that, you know, this initiative or this project that we, you know, want to register is after a political event, after, you know, the war that happened in Sudan. So does that fall under, you know, political purpose or not? What do you think?
Both really good questions. So answering your first question, does it matter if your beneficiaries, the people you're working with, are outside of the UK? No, it doesn't matter. So for both charities and CICs, your beneficiaries can be outside of the UK. So that's absolutely fine. So thinking about the political purpose question, it is an important one. So both charities and CICs, they can't be set up to further a political purpose. And as we know, like what's considered to be a political purpose can be often in contention. But when we talk about political purposes, what we really mean is being like party political, for example. So kind of advocating or supporting like the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. That's what it means to have like a pure political purpose. You can do political campaigning work in both CICs and charities, but it has to be for the benefit of the community. So if you say you set up your organization to support, do you say Sudan, to support beneficiaries in Sudan or the Sudanese community in the UK, you could do some political campaigning work as long as you were pursuing your community benefit that you set out, but your kind of core purpose for setting up cannot be political activity. And that would include like political activity relating to Sudan. So you could be, I'm trying to think of an example, setting up a community space or an educational space to support people who are from Sudan, for example. That is your community purpose. And you might do some political campaigning work around it, but the political campaigning work can't be the sole purpose, the sole kind of activity. I don't know if Kaya wants to come in any more on that. So it's a difficult one to navigate. And I would say if you're not sure, then to get a bit of advice and like either speak to us or Lucas just to kind of clarify what we're talking about when we mean political.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because, you know, as you said, these are like, it could be under this umbrella term, there could be a lot of things that we're not aware of. So we just wanted to make sure.
Definitely. There's kind of like a whole presentation we could do on what's political and campaigning. It's quite hard to summarize into a few sentences, but yeah, it is a bit tricky and it is something that you have to be aware of.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Share my screen again.
Yes, just one last question. I know you spoke about like funding in terms of grants, but for CICs or KICs, like they can receive any type of funding, like crowdfunding, donations. So it's not just we're not only talking about grants. Okay.
Yeah. not just grant funding. Yeah, crowdfunding, definitely. Donations. CICs are a bit less likely to get donations than charities, but just sort of depends on who you're getting donations from, if they're willing to give to a CIC. Loans from banks, that's another option as well. So getting investment, yeah, or loans, another way to raise money. So yeah, lots of different income streams. Grant funding is just one of them and can be a bit unreliable. Great. I think that's all the questions. I was just gonna share our link to our publications that we mentioned. So these are 2 publications that we created and we launched earlier this year. Oops, sorry. So yeah, they're available online. A lot of the information that we've discussed today is available in these 2 publications. So yeah, if you have any questions, just let us know. And yeah, thank you so much for the workshop. It's been really good. You've asked so many amazing questions. Yeah, really engaged group, and yeah, I really appreciate your contributions and interactivity, and I hope it was useful for everyone. And yeah, and then just to say one last thing is that we are offering one-to-one sessions if people for free. So if people want to have a call with Kaya and I, we do online for an hour. Just reach out to us personally or Lucas, whichever works, and we're happy to do one-to-one sessions as well. I'll hand back to you. Don't know, Kay, if you want to say anything before we close up.
Nothing else. I was just answering a couple of questions in the chat, but I know we're running out of time. So really happy to chat separately on one-on-one calls as well.
Great. Thank you. I'll hand back to Lucas.
Thank you so much, guys. I think everybody can join me in saying thank you so much for tonight. Like, that was amazing. This is the 3rd session I've done with you guys, and I've learned more again. So I keep learning every single time. So honestly, thank you so much for being with us this evening, going through and actually just making it a little bit more understandable and breaking it down. And thank you for the offer of one-on-one sessions as well. That's amazing. And that is a new perk for this cohort. People didn't have that last year, so that's really generous of you guys, and thank you so much. And I will follow up so that people can book in with those if you need. But please, just before we go, I'm going to quickly screen share. I've just got a couple of things to say, but just want to say a massive thank you to Kaya and Samara one more time. Thank you so much for this evening. Yeah, you guys are free to go unless you want to learn about Turn's brand booster, which you're welcome to stay for. But yeah, thank you guys so much from myself, from everyone at Turn, and I'm sure all of the guys here as well. It was an awesome session. So yeah, thank you, and
Great.
have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Everyone else, please stay. I'm just going to very quickly, we're going to finish before 8 tonight, which is amazing. Very, very, very quickly. Brand booster. Excuse me, I haven't spoken for a while and I'm a little bit unwell still. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Just somebody say yes if you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're back in the swing of things. So, brand booster with Turn. We've had a little bit of a pivot this year, and we are not doing a workshop this year. This is going to be self-paced learning. There's going to be a few different options for you. There's going to be the option to do this entirely online. And working with sort of AI technology and with myself and with Bijusaholo to get a brand and to get a color palette and a logo for your social startup. There is also the option to work with graphic designers, but that graphic designer option you will have to pay for. But we have some amazing contacts and we have a process, and it is still very heavily discounted. But you have a choice, basically, which you can make. Now, I'm going to be putting together an entire self-paced learning guide on Notion, which is going to launch on Wednesday, the 29th of January. So two weeks today. And in this guide, you're going to have the options presented to you, but also this brand booster brief, which is what we're going to use to bring to life your logo and your color palette and your fonts, just so that you have something to be able to show the world. You may already have a brand, in which case this doesn't apply to you. If you don't need one, that's absolutely fine. But the point of this is to say we were going to have a workshop, but we've decided not to do that. And we've decided to make this self-paced learning instead. So if you do want a brand, we will help you with it. But all of this needs to be done by yourself. And then when you're ready, Beach Saholo and myself are there to work with you. Okay, we're excited about it. It's a new way of working this year. It's going to be an intro logo for your organization, but it gives you something to be recognizable online, so that people know who you are, to be able to put on promotional materials, to be able to put on websites, put on social media. And then, you know, in a few years, you can change it. You can have a rebrand. That's also totally fine. Turn had a rebrand maybe 2.5 or 3 years into its operation, right? So, and we had another semi-rebrand last year. Not massive, but a little one. So, you know, brands change a lot, and that's absolutely fine, okay? What we want to do is we want to get you your first sort of logo that you're happy with to be able to put out there to the world, okay? So just keep an eye on that. I'm just letting you know, but there's no workshop next Wednesday now. Instead, we're launching this on Wednesday, the 29th of January, 2 weeks today. It's going to be a self-paced learning guide. Lots of videos. I promise you lots of videos, but you can do it in your own time, okay? Next, please book a session with Beach Saholo and with myself. I've seen some of you since the new year. I've had to reschedule some of you since the new year because of my illness. I apologize for that. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of you in the coming weeks. But myself and Beach Saholo are here to work with you. I know that some of you have had sessions with us now and you're like, I get it. That's what those guys do, right? Some of you haven't had sessions with us yet. Please do book in, and then I promise you'll get that understanding as to why we are offering our time and how we can help you. Sometimes we just end up talking and thinking things through. Sometimes we will be working on the business plan as well. But this resource is available to you. We're not going to force you to book this, but it's up to you to book it with us. All right, so there's the QR codes. We're going to send a link again, but please, we are offering our time and our expertise. And so please do book with us so that we can help you. We can work with you on your social startups. That is it for tonight. I have one. Oh, no, it isn't. There's one more thing. Of course. How could I forget? Feedback. If you could please scan, I'd love to hear. There's 2 bits of feedback I need from you. If you could, first of all, fill this one out, scan this QR code, and let us know what you thought about having experts in for a session like this. Usually we have the alumni teaching, and myself and Beach Saholo make the content with alumni, and we do it that way, which we think works really well. But on the expert sessions like this, where we need lawyers in, we quite often think it's better to bring in lawyers. So I'd love to hear what you guys thought about having an external organization running the workshop tonight. How did it go? But also, in the chat, if you could please fill out a separate form, which is for Kaya and Samara. They want some feedback on how they're doing as an organization and what they're doing well and what they could change. I have seen this presentation change so much in 3 years, and honestly, tonight was amazing. That was so good, so clear. They've improved it so much. So obviously they're taking the feedback on board. It was amazing before, but now it's even better. So if you could give them some feedback as well, they'd be really, really grateful for that. That is now the last thing, and I did finish before 8 o'clock. It's lovely to see you all again. Thank you for showing up, you know, and sticking with it on this Wednesday in mid-January. I'm really excited to see some of you soon. I'm sure Beach Saholo is as well. But that's it from us. I hope that was useful. Good luck with all the registrations and stuff, and looking forward to the next 6 months. Remember, graduation is only in June. It's not far away now. Have a lovely evening, guys, and we will speak very, very soon. We'll be in touch on WhatsApp. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.